Today on CityCast DC, President Donald Trump has set his sights on the next DC fixer-upper. The president wants to renovate the golf course on East Potomac Park, but there's one big problem. That island, south of the mall, is sinking. Reporter Stephanie Mencimer with Mother Jones has been reporting on the problems facing Trump's latest project in the district, and she joins us to explain. Today's Monday, August 17th. I'm Ben Brash, and here's what DC's talking about. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you published this fantastic piece for Mother Jones last week about Trump's fixation with overhauling a municipal golf course at East Potomac Park, which locals know to be Haynes Point. I'd love to start with you just kind of like walking us through the basics of what exactly Trump wants to do with the area.
Sure. So Haynes Point is not too far from the National Mall. It's kind of near the Tidal Basin and the Jefferson Memorial. And I think Trump flies over it in his helicopter from the White House when he's on his way to get onto Air Force One. And I think in this first term, he's decided that because there's a lot of undeveloped waterfront property in this park. It's just really flat. There's not much there except for this little municipal golf course. And so he's decided that he thinks he wants to turn this into a championship level sort of PGA golf course where they could have, like the US Open or like big golf tournaments there, and a place that would be a lot more fancy and probably exclusive than the municipal course that's there right now.
Yeah, fancy and exclusive is not how we describe this space for sure. Your piece gets into a lot of the problems with really any proposed construction there. But one of the biggest issues, as I understand it, is the flooding and the seawall. And that's because East Potomac Park is entirely artificial, right? It's an artificial island built way back in the late 1800s. So can you kind of take us back there and tell us how it was built?
Back in the 1800s, I think it was the Army Corps of Engineers or whatever its precursor was, decided to dredge the shipping channels around Washington Channel and that part of the Potomac River because they had filled up with silt and it was hard for ships to get into, I guess, I don't know if DC's a port exactly, but get ships to the city. So they dredged the river and they used, and all that stuff they dredged up from the bottom, they just kind of piled up and created this fake island, as it's now known as East Potomac Park. And it took them several years, actually. I think they started in the late 1800s, and I don't think the island was finished until 1911. And then at that point, Congress declared that they wanted to make this into a national park, and they wrote some language into the law that says the park is here and forever dedicated to the public use. And, there's some fancy language about that, but it's supposed to be a public space open to the public always, not some, so private development is basically banned from this space. And I think it was about a couple of years later, they hired a famous architect or golf course architect who designed, Walter Travis, who designed a municipal golf course. And it was wildly popular when it opened in 1920, and it's been pretty much in continuous use ever since, with some variations. But it's basically been a local golf course, and it's a little bit funky in that it's overseen and managed by the National Park Service, not the district government. So it's kind of rare for the National Park Service to have a golf course in its portfolio. Usually they have like Yosemite and Yellowstone, but here in DC, just because of this fluke of history, they're in charge of this municipal golf course, which is why Trump can actually do something to it, because it's actually in his portfolio.
Yeah, such a rarity for the National Park Service to have a golf course. Some people would kind of view like a golf course as antithetical to like what the National Parks does. How'd you get onto this? Are you a golfer?
I'm not a golfer. I'm actually a swimmer, and I used to play a lot of tennis. My husband's also a big tennis player, and there are kind of tennis courts at the same park behind the golf course, but they were shut down in 2024. And that's kind of another mystery of why. But they also had issues with some flooding and problems with the unstable land. And so the Park Service closed them and they were supposed to be renovated, but they haven't been. So anyway, so I knew about the tennis courts and that they were closed and that like one of them got a big sinkhole in it a few years ago, which was interesting, just a sign of how unstable this island is. And but also I used to, or I can't remember, was it a Blue Moon, swim on a DC Masters team. And the swim team used to swim down there because it was the only Olympic-sized outdoor pool in the District of Columbia. And the district government actually managed the pool. And so we got swim time down there. And so we would have practices. When my kids were little, I took them there to go swimming. And so I was very familiar with the pool. And that's actually kind of what, well, aside from that, but like spending time down there, anybody who goes down there can see that it floods all the time. I mean, it's a crazy space. They do a DC bike ride down there every year where the city closes streets around the city. And then I think they usually start at Haynes Point because there are a lot of cyclists down there too. And I remember I took my kids down there for this ride and we got to the end of the island and you couldn't really get through because the whole road was underwater. So we got to push our bikes through there. And, it was just clear that the whole thing is falling back into the river. And so I've been kind of obsessed with it sinking for a long time. But then what actually really got me going was that in I think it was in 2020, the city closed the pool. And the people I swim with had been monitoring it because the pool had been closed since like 2016. And the city had this grand plan that they were going to renovate it. And, we kept waiting and waiting, like, shouldn't they be done by now? And then people would go down there and be like, oh, this doesn't look good. And as it turns out, the construction was just a complete disaster. And every time they dug a hole, basically, to try to build a new pool, they hit water and everything flooded. And it was just a big, muddy mess.
You describe it as the soil as being sponge-like, where like they would dig and then they'd find water, which, technically sounds like a good idea for a pool. But it all just keeps filling in and in. And again, I'm a native Floridian. So the idea of the water table being very close to the surface is not foreign to me. But that also means that it's really hard to build stable buildings or even dig deep to be able to do so for things like a pool, when the land is that wet and squishy. So it sounds like it's kind of a nightmare to build on because it's not real soil, right? It's artificial. It's muck and stuff that they dug up, in the late 1800s. So it sounds like it may not be possible to build stuff there. I'm not a geologist, and also it seems like Trump is dead set on moving this forward. Is he? And how would he have to like deal with these problems? And what kind of solutions are on the table?
Well, it's funny because like all of his projects in DC, there has been a lawsuit about this that actually was triggered when Trump had this brilliant idea and also the Interior Secretary decided that when they tore down the East Wing of the White House last year, that they would take all the rubble and the dirt and everything and dump it on the golf course at East Potomac Park. And so when people realized that was happening, they filed a lawsuit over it because, they assumed that the White House was old and it was full of like asbestos and lead and junk and stuff that should really not be sitting on a porous man-made island in the middle of the Potomac, which is the drinking water supply for the entire like DMV. And so the lawsuit was like in February, and I think people were suspicious that Trump was thinking about doing more with the golf course. He'd made some noises about it back then. And then in May, he basically, I think Notice did a story saying that the White House was saying they're going to shut down the golf course and start construction like right away. And so there was another, court action, and the plaintiffs went to court and asked the judge to issue an injunction to prevent Trump from doing any more work on the place without having gone through all of the, regular procedures and public input on it. And in court, they were saying, oh, we're not yet there. We're not going to do anything. Like, this isn't happening. And we haven't got a plan yet. But then Trump went out to the island with his golf course designer, Tom Fazio, and the Washington Post snapped a photo of him carrying the design that they've already made for this championship golf course And then Trump said, oh, yeah, we're going to start construction on September 1st, which was definitely not what they said in court. So nobody really knows what's going on. But, theoretically, the president thinks they're going to start building this thing in like 2 weeks, which is crazy.
Let's talk about the DC SCU, your friendly neighborhood sustainable energy utility. 15 years and they're still here. Talk about eyes on the prize. Their mission possible. Serving residents with efficiency and clean energy programs, improving affordability and quality of life across all 8 wards. They've delivered $2.2 billion in lifetime savings for district residents and businesses alike. They've prevented 10.1 million metric tons of emissions right here. These are your neighbors working for you. And it makes sense that they're in Southeast by the ballpark because they are knocking it out of the park daily. There is no ivory tower. They're on the sidewalks, out on the streets, and they're at your door, making it happen more capable, more committed than ever. Doing right by you and you and you. I see you standing up. That's right. Clap your hands because DCSCU is 15 and still redefining power in the district. Find out more at dcscu.com.
So let me ask, who is a foot in the bill for this new world-class championship golf course? Is it you and me? What does this mean for our pocketbooks? Or do we not know? And that's also kind of concerning that there's like a blank check that's being written that has our names on it. Do we know what's going on there with the money?
We do not. I think Trump has said, kind of like with the ballroom, that, oh, we'll get private donations to pay for this. But I think in the budget request for additional funding for the Iran war, I was told there was some money in there for the National Park Service, and it's a lot, like $500 million or something that he asked for, that people think is partly for the golf course. And because like you said, it's not impossible to build out there, but it's really expensive. Like doing the work properly and being able to keep the water from ruining everything is a real challenge. And that's why nobody's done it, because lots of people have looked at this place and been like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did this and that and build all these cool things out there? And I've seen plans where people thought they'd build all kinds of stuff, and it's just none of it ever happens because it's just so expensive. Like just fixing the seawall. The woman who used to be the regional director for the National Park Service said that they got some extra money from the Great Outdoors Act from a few years ago, and like I think they had a good amount of money, $250 million, maybe a little more than that, and they had to decide how to use it. And so they looked at fixing the seawall at East Potomac, and she said it was going to cost millions of dollars per foot, like not per mile, but per foot. And the perimeter of the island or the isthmus is 3 miles. So
that's
just,
crazy.
You can do the math there. And that's just to shore it up, to keep it from flooding. Like that doesn't even fully address the soil problem, but that's just to keep the water from coming over onto the sidewalk like it does now.
Well, I was going to ask, yeah, what is it like there now? It sounds like everyone kind of agrees that it needs some TLC, but it's just like prohibitively expensive to do it. Is that right?
Yeah. And, lots of people have wanted the Park Service to fix this for years and years. And I think the Park Service, it did a study in 2011 to see how, what could be done about the seawall. And I think they realized, like, because the seawall is so old, it's not actually anchored into bedrock. So they'd have to like put footings down, through 10 feet of water and then like 100 feet down into the ground below that in order to anchor it. And, to build in the water, I don't know, if like scuba divers or whatever they do, however you build, bridges, like that's like building a bridge or something.
Again, as a Floridian, I know that to be like tremendously expensive work. And again, like this relationship with the National Park Service in DC is not entirely foreign to us. We saw it like with the Malcolm X Park fountain, like everyone was thrilled that got fixed up. And, DC probably more than any other populace in America, is mad at the National Park Service, where the rest of the nation loves them, and we're like, "Can you fix up that little, lot at the end of my block that is for some reason federal land?" It sounds like there's already been resistance to all this. So how is that all taking shape?
Well, I think that primary resistance came through the lawsuit. And I think that after Trump just sort of plowed ahead and tore down part of the White House without giving anybody advance notice, I think the shock factor there really primed the local activists to get in early, like to not wait until something, not wait till the bulldozers have already started coming in.
But those two projects are connected via a proposal I read in your story, the East Wing being torn down, and it's like this is all part of the same cinematic universe of buildings going up and down. There's one quote that really stood out to me in your piece when we were talking about the water. And it's where the president of the American Society of Golf Course Architects, which is just a great thing to think about all the different associations out there, who said, if and when flooding occurs, the water, quote, has to go somewhere. And of course, right, the water finds its level, right? We know that. So even if they can cover the course in East Wing rubble and, whatever else is in there, then it could pose problems for, I don't know, the National Mall?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the maps, the guy from the Association for Golf Architects told me that when they build golf courses, it's not unusual that they would fill in a floodplain because they build in other places near water. If they fill in a floodplain in one place, they have to make a new one somewhere else because the water has to go somewhere. And so, DC is already really prone to flooding, and especially with climate change and sea level rise, like DC itself is in the 100-year floodplain, and storm surges here, bring water can bring water up through the city. The predictions are that, there could be flooding all the way to Constitution Avenue. And so, if you just look at how close the Haynes Point Park is to things like the Jefferson Memorial, it would make sense that some of the water is going to come in this way, or, the wharf, or anywhere around the edge of the city, depending on what they decide to do. And the thing is, they just finished, because East Potomac Park was so expensive, they didn't do anything with the seawall, but the Park Service did fix the seawall around the tidal basin, around the Jefferson Memorial, and to protect the cherry trees and, a historic monument. So there was, a cultural landmark there that they really didn't want to see underwater. So that got fixed, but even that cost like $113 million. It spent, 2 years of construction plus years of planning for that. And so the idea that they're just going to go and fill in Haynes Point to keep, to raise it high enough so that it stops flooding the golf course, I think could threaten other important parts of the monumental core.
And R.I.P. Stumpy as well, the tree, who
Yes.
we lost courageously in the great renovation battles. To kind of step back, when you spoke to experts, where did they see the future of East Potomac Park? Like, how long before the whole thing is, I don't know, underwater without intervention?
So the Potomac River is a tidal river. So it's because it flows into the ocean. It's very much, the tide comes in and out twice a day at the Potomac. So, sometimes there's no flooding, but then the tide comes in and it's like 20 feet above, it goes up to the road. And so it's affected by sea level rise in a way that I think a lot of other rivers are not. And I think their predictions are that the sea level in the Potomac, or the water level in the Potomac, will go up about 2 feet by 2080, something like that. So, like much of DC, it's probably a little bit doomed. We're all going to have to face the reality. I think we all feel that way. Yeah, of climate change, without some serious remediation, it's probably going to at least shrink to a smaller size without some big intervention. But it's a funny thing because the park itself is really flat and it's nice. Like, people like to picnic down there, and there's bird watching and people ride bikes around it, and they don't play tennis there anymore, but they could. I don't think we'll ever swim in the swimming pool there again, but it's a nice enough park. But I think the problem is that when I talked to the former Park Service director, she said, there's only so much money for the national parks, and like, do we really want to spend like $300 or $400 million like keeping East Potomac Park from falling into the river, or do we want to like save the visitor center at Yellowstone, or make sure that the bathrooms at Zion are getting cleaned, or deal with the traffic problems there? Like, there's so many projects and so much backlog of repairs that the entire National Park Service needs. It's hard to really make an argument that like a place that like a few guys fish from and 20 dudes ride their bike around at lunchtime is really like the top of the list of priorities. So I don't think the prospects of East Potomac are great unless Trump really, succeeds in getting some money for it. But I don't think normal people think like this is a great use of taxpayer funds to try to, turn this park into something it's not.
It's funny you mentioned normal people. I was thinking about golf. Yeah, it kind of has this aura as a sport for the rich and the elite, the upper class. And that's like not what's happening down at East Potomac Park. It's like a very pedestrian, no pun intended, kind of golf course. So if the renovation goes ahead, no matter how doomed, how do you see everyday Washingtonians losing out? Like what will we lose in the kind of fabric of that part of town?
Well, I think that the current course, is just super accessible. My son used to go out there. He was never like a huge golfer, but what he really liked to do was just drive the cart around.
The best part, yeah, of course.
Yeah, right. And we did that because it costs like for him, I don't know, $10 or something. That like it was, I don't know, it's like $40 to play at 18 rounds, but there's also 9-hole courses, and I think that's what we drove around. So like, if that was all he wanted to do was just drive the cart when he was 9 years old or whatever, it's, when no one was looking, because you're not supposed to do that. But
I won't tell anyone. It's okay.
Don't do that at home kind of thing. But he'd play a little golf and then drive. And like, that's the perfect place to do it. It's a great place for little kids to learn. I mean, if you go down there, you see people with their children playing golf all the time. And it's an amateur course. It's a great place for people to learn how to play. And it's really accessible for people who live around here. You can just ride your bike down. I see people actually with their clubs on their bikes and stuff, so it's good. But it's, and I think last year, something like 125 or 130,000 rounds of golf were played at Haynes Point. So that's actually quite a few people who are playing golf. So I should actually retract my statement that no one uses it. But a lot of people do play golf there. And there was actually a plan to renovate the golf course and to do some upgrades and to deal with some of the flooding, within reason. And that was all underway through the National Links Trust, which is the nonprofit that manages the golf course. But I think it was in December, Trump canceled their lease. And they had a 50-year lease, and they were a couple of years into like the planning and the normal like process and transparency and getting public input for the changes and the upgrades they were going to make on the course. They had all kinds of cool stuff underway, and Trump just pulled the plug and said, you're not moving fast enough, and therefore you're in violation, and so long. And so there was a big fight over that. And so the National Links Trust is still operating the course, and it's a little unclear what their role might be, but basically they're just still running it until Trump shuts it down, I think.
To be continued. Stephanie, thank you so much. This has been really informative. I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast to talk to us about, again, your excellent piece that everyone should read in Mother Jones.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See ya.